Well, hello. Welcome to episode 3. I'm Blue Dabu Die. Blue fish people till I die. Where we're gonna be where I'm gonna be yakking about the Tau Empire from Warhammer 40k because that is what you all voted for last time. So, to begin, if you aren't familiar with the Tau Empire, there's actually the Tau Empire as a whole, and then there is the Tau the race, and so or the species, I guess. Excuse me. The Tau race. So this we're going to start off with the Tau race, and then from there we'll go into the Tau Empire proper. In case you guys weren't familiar with that, which I'm sure a large amount of you, or pretty much all of you, will. But on the off chance that there's somebody who has no idea who I'm talking about, this is for you. So a little bit of a drink there. So originally, the Tau homeworld was discovered, again, Tau the species, was discovered by Mechanicus Explorator fleet in the 35th millennium. When they were found, they were originally about like Stone Age in terms of technology. So it's kind of an interesting little tidbit that they were seen and summarily just like dismissed by the Mechanicus to the point of where they were just completely forgotten about. Anyway, so kind of at the start of like Tau history as a whole, which they refer to as the Mont Owl, which I'm sure I'm going to butcher all of the Tau words, just so you're aware. I have no shame. I don't care. I'm fucking trying. some of these Tau words are like, I get what Kane says that there's too many frickin' consonants because that's what it feels like sometimes, and you're just trying to get. You looking at these words and you're like, how do these go together? I don't understand. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I have stupid mouth. I don't know. So yeah. Um, so yeah, the Mont Owl, which translates to the terror in Gothic, which is obviously kind of a allegory. Would it be allegory? Whatever that word would be. To like the human Dark Ages, basically the same idea. They were grouped into like they're warring tribes, essentially when they first started out. One sec here. Hey, Eris, good to see you. Yeah, I'm hoping we get some folks. There's a lot of I know I have quite a few followers on Twitter, X, whatever, that are big into the Tau. So I'm hoping those guys show up. It'd be cool. But yeah, so the Tau originally were like, I guess, Bronze Age. Well, they were founded by the Mechanicus in the 35th millennium. They were Stone Age, and then actually they're holy shit. Well, thank you, Eris. Good lord. Oh, whoa. All right then. Well, shit. Well, thank you again, sir. Good lord. Yeah. I need to do something about that notification sound because it's a little obnoxious. Yeah, I get you. um. Anyway, so. Oh yeah. So they were originally the Tower Warring Tribes, and it was about is like when this is that kind of going on, that the Ethereals showed up. Um, so they showed up. There's like the warriors from the plains. They're assaulting this fortress city called Town. Oof. Yeah, I told you I'm gonna butcher these names. Not even gonna lie. They had originally tried to negotiate, but the plains warriors were just like, "Nah, we're gonna kill everybody in the city." And they laid siege to it, which lasted about 5 years. The city was built, had thick walls, it had cannon emplacements there. Actually, had gunpowder at this point. But during a siege, there's a bunch of disease and starvation and shit. So they were getting close to being done. And then these two guys, two mysterious Tau, came down from the mountains. One went to each side, so the plains warriors and the people in the fortress. Um, and so they went to both sides and they basically sat down and said, it's very important that all Tau to come together. You need to stop killing each other. Blah 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 blah. Now you're thinking it's like, well, how do these complete strangers walk into a war camp uncontested? Well, it's because ethereals, for whatever reason, they just can't be disobeyed. Go and read Titan's Bane, Space C40K. Hell yeah, dude, do it. Yes, sir. Well, thank you again for popping in and dropping a whole bunch of subs, buddy. That's awesome. Let's see here. Oh, we're gonna have an ad in 30 seconds. Well, bummer. So anyway, they spoke to them about achieving peace between all the Tau, coming together as in a whole society, and and they had this basically this aura of obedience. Well, it is always deeply appreciated, sir. And honestly, like, you just showing up and watching with us is awesome. Awesome enough. Whatever you can give us is deeply appreciated. Views and all. That goes out to all the rest of you. We just love it when you guys show up. Yes. So, ethereals go in there. They can't be disobeyed. They just have like this aura of peaceful control, I suppose. And these guys were the original ethereals. So yeah, they talked with these leaders and they basically got them to agree that, yeah, they should stop killing each other. And then this is also when the concept of the greater good was kind of introduced to Tau society as a whole. So, putting the need of the entire society above the individuals, essentially what the greater good is. It's for the greater good. Exactly what it sounds like. So, yeah. So these two sides came together and made peace. And then, not necessarily simultaneously, although it's not exactly clear, the ethereals appeared before the other tribes on the planet of Tau. Their planet is also called Tau. Bringing them together as a whole to one big society. And fun fact, those different tribes became the castes, which we'll talk about here in a bit. Anyway, so the ethereals come down, they unite the entire Tau species together under, this one ideal, which is the greater good. And part of that is there's some manifest destiny to it where, we need to go out to the stars and we need to spread the greater good because it should be, yeah, we'll go more into the greater good here too, a little bit. Pipe chest. Very nice. So yeah. So they unite all these tribes together, and then they, this is like what kind of leads to the big explosion of Tau technological advancement, because they have this close-knit group of leaders, ethereals, that are able to take all of their collective efforts and focus it towards very specific things. Which doesn't sound like it would do a lot, but then you think of if every human being on the planet Earth was peacefully directed into working together flawlessly to, do something. Think about that for a second. Think of how much you could actually achieve. All right, so it's the same idea. So when you kind of think of it that way, it does sort of explain their technological advancement, how quickly it was, at least in relation to relative to the rest of the galaxy, right? I mean, they are in the Stone Ages, and then 6,000 years later, they're putting up a fight against a galaxy-spanning empire. So, that's pretty impressive. But yeah, and so they hit this particular level of technological advancement, and they start expanding out into space. taking planets and fully colonized star systems are called septs. Like it's basically like like it's not a colony anymore. It's like a firmly established like planet, Tau planet. But yeah, and so when they go to increase their borders, they call them spheres of expansion or sphere expansions. And they've done 5 as of the era Indomitus, which is the current chunk of time we're in currently, I believe. Yeah. 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 That's right. But yeah, so it's sphere expansion is exactly what it sounds like. So it's a combination military campaign and colonization effort. So they send the military in first. Well, not necessarily first. It depends on the situation, but they send the military in first. If it's empty world, they colonize it. If it's not, then that's when the water caste comes in. That's their diplomats. Which, like I said, I'll talk about the caste in a bit, and they'll try to do it that way. Anyway, where did lost my brain? And yeah, like I said, there are instances of other planets like joining Tau Empire through diplomacy alone, which is kind of one of the more unique things about the Tau. Actually, I think it is unique. I can't think of any other. I mean, I suppose the Imperium taking back its own planets might have that happen. At least during the Great Crusade. You seen that? But typically that doesn't happen. So it's a very Tau thing. So as of the current timeline, they have 20 developed septs and 100 worlds settled, which is not too bad. But then you compare it to the Imperium, and they're outnumbered like 10,000 to 1. Something like that. 100 worlds, and it's supposed to be 1 million. Is that 10,000? Yeah, be 10,000 to 1. No, yeah, 10,000 to 1. So, yeah, they're very, very small in comparison to the Imperium, which is, yeah, kind of a big deal. But anyway, so moving on from their origin, like that's just kind of a really brief overview. The origin of the Tau Empire. And that's, I mean, yeah, pretty much. It starts with the Tau species. Now, in actuality, the Tau Empire as a whole is made up of the Tau and then several, they call them member species, which I'll talk about them too. But there's, it's a conglomerate, it's a confederation of multiple races or species, except like the Tau and the Ethereals are kind of, well, the Tau are more equal than others, and then the Ethereals are just straight up like top of the food chain. Period. So there's that whole thing. But as far as the Tau species themselves, so what's really interesting about them too, and I didn't actually like think of it this way, but so those warring tribes I talked about earlier, very briefly, there's ones in the fortresses and there's ones in the plains. The plains warriors. Well, the castes are like the Tau castes because they have a caste society, and there's 4 of them. It's the fire caste, the earth caste, the water caste, and the air caste. But it goes a little deeper than that. So they are actually like each caste is physically and temperamentally different from the rest of the castes. So like you have the fire caste, that's all their warriors, like their infantry, like these guys, the fire warriors. They're up on screen. They do a majority of the fighting, right? So then you have the earth caste, which is oh crap, I'm kind of skipping sections. Anyway, they're different castes, but it manifests to the point of where it comes down to like physically and temperamentally. Like each caste is like almost a subspecies of Tau. That's what I should have said. Um, which is I thought was very interesting, and I never really thought of it that way because they are still technically Tau, but it's like, you know, what's a good example? Dog breeds almost. I don't know if that's actually accurate or not. Oh well, we'll just pretend it is. Anyway, so and I'll go into those differences in the cast section, which I think is coming up after this. Um, and actually later on, the Ethereals banned intercaste breeding, so all castes have to breed within their area, breed within their caste. Sounds like eugenics. Yay! Anyway. But anyway, Tau are humanoid in shape with hoofed feet, four-fingered hands with one thumb. So it's 3 fingers and a thumb. And their skin is typically like a gray-blue variation of like a gray-blue hue-ish. But that color can vary widely, or yeah, can vary quite a bit. Depending on which sept the Tau is from, which system that particular Tau is from. So the range can vary quite a bit more than that. Their skin is tough and leathery, produces next to no moisture. They have those flat faces that you see big wide eyes, and then they have that slit in the middle of their forehead. And down through where, humans have noses. In general, their vision is a bit better than humans. They can see a little bit further into the ultraviolet and infrared spectrums. However, their pupils do not dilate, and they have poorer depth perception and then slower vision focusing reflexes than humans, especially in low light conditions. And then their olfactory organs are in their mouths, interestingly enough. Generally speaking, like Tau as a whole are weaker than an average human. That includes the fire caste, which are like the strongest out of all of them, physically strongest out of all of them. They're just slightly weaker than a regular person, generally speaking. Another interesting thing about the Tau, the species anyway, again, is that they don't have, like, there have been 0 ever confirmed Tau psychers. And they actually have, like, almost no concept of the word. Not no concept, they have a better idea now. But for the most part, they barely, like, to them, they only really know is that it exists. And that the Imperium uses it for travel and all that. They've seen combat psychers too, but yeah, basically all they know is that it exists, at best. However, they do have a very mild resistance to mind-affecting psychic powers, just because of that. And they have an almost non-existent presence in the warp. Like when their souls are described by like daemons or psychers using witch sight, it's like a little wispy, like will-o'-the-wisp kind of thing, little flame. Whereas like when it's a human soul, even a normal one, that's like a bonfire almost in comparison. So, and that's why there are no Tau psychers, because like none of them are even anywhere close to having any sort of like psychic resonance, or well, psychic ability. So that's why you just never see them. Now, the one thing about the ethereals is that they have like a diamond-shaped like bony ridge on their forehead, and it's believed that this is where their like kind of their control comes from. It's like a pheromone thing where it's like a passive psychic, like latent psychic ability, but nobody's really sure. But that is the running. That was the thing originally. I think that people were guessing is that it was like a pheromone thing. And then now it's like being pitched as more of a psychic thing. Honestly, I think it would have to be psychic. It would just have to be, just because like pheromones ain't gonna do shit if you don't have an ethereal wandering around with all of your Tau all the time. You know. And there's an instance where a Tau commander doesn't have his ethereals anymore, because that's like the big thing is the commander always has, in big expeditions, will have an ethereal that goes along with them. And the stated reason is for like morale purposes. But that's because the ethereals have an influence over the Tau. I don't know. Well, that's what I think. I think it's a psychic thing. Be my guess. But yeah. So that's kind of the other interesting thing too, is you have these ethereals that just essentially exert an aura of control over the Tau species, specifically. So they're also kind of making that a little more sinister. I know with people, some of the big Tau fans are pissy when they kind of made that determination instead of it just being like, oh, they agreed to it. Which I'm sorry, like, I don't know. I suppose they're aliens, it could have gone differently, but I mean, if they're already killing each other, I have a hard time believing that two random Tau from nowhere decided to just be like, let's just talk to these people because we're really charismatic and it'll be fine. I don't buy it. It makes more sense that it would have to be some sort of extra thing. I suppose they could maybe do like maybe it's like a hard genetically coded thing, but then that also you'd think would be artificial in some way because it's just that specific. And they had supposedly never seen ethereals before this point when they all came together. So I don't know. A genetic thing would be an interesting twist to it. I actually wrote a former Tau Fire Warrior character, an original character for one of my stories that I haven't finished because I'm really good at not finishing them. Who took some shrapnel to the brain, and I imply that it fucks with his brain enough to where the ethereals can't. Their aura of control does nothing to him. He's gotten that brain damage from shrapnel, and I thought that was kind of an interesting kind of concept to him. Anyway. So yeah, so the big thing with the Tau is the greater good, right? That's, you'll hear it everywhere. For the greater good, that's all the ethereals talk about, it's whatever. So the greater good is there's their uniting philosophy that, kind of, that binds together all of Tau society, from top to bottom. And it says that all self-aware beings are equal and important to their society. And then it forces the Tau society as a whole to set aside interpersonal squabbles, selfish desires, to unite for the greater good of the Empire and every other intelligent species in the galaxy. Right? Now, the Tau have not said specifically that they want to obliterate every other sentient species of the galaxy. As I said before, some Imperial worlds have actually just joined the Tau Empire willingly. However, they're not free to just do whatever once they're in the Tau Empire. They still have to follow the tenets of the greater good. But what's really fun about that is they actually can still, humans that get inducted into the Tau Empire can still worship the God Emperor. They kind of discourage it, the Watercast goes out and tries to convince people not to do that anymore. But publicly, at least, it's still okay to worship the God Emperor. Which is kind of funny when you think about it, because if they're still worshiping the God Emperor, they're passively giving him strength while being in the Tau Empire. I think that's funny. And while we're on the subject of the greater good, is I'm going to talk about there's a community joke that the Tau are space communists, and it's been rammed in the ground a million times. And I still make the joke because I think it's funny. Just because partially because it annoys people, and just partially because it just amuses my tism, I guess. I don't know. Whatever. Leave me alone. I do what I want. But anyway, that was the joke, right? Is they're space communists? Well, they're not. They're collectivist for sure. 100% collectivist. But they're not communist. They do have like an economy. They do have a currency because they, at least in some ways, because they trade with other empires, other species, whatever, in between themselves. And while it is state controlled in the sense that everybody's divided into into castes, and whatever, it's like it's not really said one way or the other if they're not allowed to pursue, like, I guess in the terms of the Earth caste anyway, they can like experiment with stuff, I would imagine. Like, not everything is like an ethereal came to them and said, research a better fork and or something, right? And they did that. Like, somewhere in there has to be some free will where they're like, hey, this is a cool thing. What about this? And they're like, okay, cool, you go for it. Maybe. I don't know. But it doesn't seem like everything is state controlled. Like, it is, but not like, I don't know. No. At the very least, they're not communist because they have a hierarchy and they have a state. It's not a classless society. They're literally divided into castes. And it's not a stateless society because they have the High Council of Ethereals that runs the whole fucking thing. So, they're not communist. Authoritarian, very much so. But it's like it's almost like a velvet glove authoritarian. Like, it's tyranny, but it looks nice from the outside, but it'll still kill you real good if you don't do what you're told or re-educate you. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, really, like, again, the joke is they're space communists. They're not communists. Authoritarian, for sure. Collectivist, oh yeah, but communist, no. So yeah. Anyway, speaking of the castes, so like I mentioned before, Tao society is divided into castes. It's the fire caste, water caste, earth caste, and air caste, and they all have different roles that they fulfill. And again, this is even reflected in their physiology. Like, they're almost like subspecies of the Tao species. Again, now we're back to the Tao species and not the Empire. I forgot I kind of go back and forth a little bit. But each of the castes have, like, the rank structure is the same across the different castes, like, as terms of is what they're titled. It's just they have a prefix and then they have a suffix, and the suffix is what determines their rank, right? So now the prefix is what determines what their caste is. So fire caste is Shas. The earth caste is, I think it's Fio, Fio. Water is Por, Por. Air is Kor, Kor. And then an ethereal is referred to as an Aun, which is Aun. So then from there, you then add on the suffix. So let's say we want to talk about like a fire caste, like, trainee. So that'd be a Shasal. So it's SHAS apostrophe SAAL, and that's like the lowest. That's in training. So that's like a trainee for the fire, or or they call it like a trainee for the fire cast. Then an apprentice for the earth, assistant for the water, and for the air cast, it's a deliverer, so a courier. Then if you go to, like, say, a full soldier, so like a private in the U.S. Army, effectively. So Firecast, that'd be a Shazla. So it's yeah, and then so on. So then you go up to the next, which is veteran. So thinking like a sergeant. So it's Chasui. Actually, I think I'm pronouncing that pretty good. I'm proud of myself for that. Too bad nobody's here to hear it. And then you have the Chasfray, which is kind of like a lower level officer essentially, but they refer to him as like a hero because they're kind of infamous because that's another aspect of the Taos. They're very about propaganda and showing how great the greater good is and so on and so forth. And that's how they kind of give this outward appearance of positivity that I think a lot of people read into way too much with, as far as like how good they actually are. They talk about the unreliable kids feel so tight in Spain. You have the rest of your saying your pronunciation is correct as far as I understand. Sweet. I'm glad you heard it. Made me happy. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So a lot of things that they say are like positive about the Tao empires. They see it's this propaganda that they keep putting out that it's the greater good, everything's great, and then they give you shit when they talk about unreliable narrator and all this other stuff, and I'm like, you're missing this big thing that like the Tao Empire is their unreliable narrator, like you say the Imperium is, if we're going off of your logic, and you're falling for it, and not even like that connection's not being formed. I've always found that funny. Anyway, so then you go up to like a Chassel, which is like a bit higher of an officer. Probably, I mean, what would I put that at? Probably colonel or above would be a Chassfray, or Chassel, excuse me. And then you have a Chasseau, which is just the letter O. And that's like tippy top general of the Firecast. So, yeah. That's just the basic, that's their rank structure. It's pretty simple. And like I said, the suffix denotes the actual rank, and that is the same across all the casts. It's the prefix that changes. So then going into the individual casts, you have the fire casts. Like I said, they're the strongest. They're like, they do like physically strongest, and they do all the fighting typically. A little shorter than a standard human. And when you see like a fire warrior, like what's up on the screen now, that's that's the fire cast. It's always a fire cast. You see somebody in a tank or a battle suit, that's fire cast. Always. So then you have the earth cast, and that's like their technicians, laborers, artisans, scientists, and engineers. So they handle like all research, construction, artistry, and then like anything related to those fields. They handle that throughout the empire. And they're shorter. They typically tend to be shorter and kind of like wider, stout. Then from there, the Earth cast literally maintains everything across the empire. Like your mechanic would be an Earth cast dude, right? Almost kind of like how the Mechanicus is with the Imperium, except instead of being heavily augmented, they're just born that way. Ha! To a point, anyway. Then you have the water cast, which is all their diplomats and their merchants. And what's funny is the water cast tip works. I mean, really, the ethereals are kind of everywhere, except I think, I don't know, they don't really talk about how involved the ethereals are with the earth cast. They do mention that the water cast kind of like works hand in hand with the ethereals, which makes sense. And the ethereals will show up on the battlefield with the fire cast as like to give a morale boost and that sort of thing, but I can't recall them ever actually talking about them, like how they interact with the earth cast, or if they're just kind of like, this, we need a thing, do this, make a thing. This is our problem, make a thing for it, or is there an ethereal that kind of functions similarly to they do with their commanders, where they're there as like a morale boost and, to give advice and blah, blah, blah. Kind of curious. I can't recall anything specific that I remember. Anyway, so yeah, so then you have the water castes, they're diplomats and they're merchants. They tend to be taller than most Tau, kind of slim, like thinner. Um, and obviously, because of their role, they maintain relations with the other species, and actually will like foster cooperation between the castes. Because there are some times where they kind of clash, not like anything like super bad, but it's different priorities, right? Between different castes, I could see, and then so they got to kind of clean up those times that they have issues, um, as well as like other empires. So when they're dealing with the Imperium, for example, or when they decided to try and do diplomacy with the Dark Eldar, uh, which went about as well as you could expect, which is not at all for those poor diplomats. But yeah, so those are their diplomats. And they usually will, they can speak multiple languages. So, in the case of the Imperium, Low Gothic, Tau, whatever the Kroot speak, the Vespid are a whole other thing. And anyway, they're the diplomats that learn languages and shit. And they're also their main, like the Tau's main kind of more subtle apparatus to gain a foothold societally on like a neighboring planet. So like an imperial world, they'll start slow, like very quietly. The water castles start having their guys show up. First it'll start off as they're trading Tau technology. Oh yeah, it is funny. Yeah, so Air says it's funny that Kane, despite all his ability to notice differences in humans and recognize gene taint in individuals such as gene stealers, is completely blind to Tau caste differences, and it's true. He never comments on it, or even acknowledges that there are different castes. If I'm recalling too, like it just like doesn't. He just doesn't care. No, that's not true. He does. He does bring up that they are from the water caste, but he doesn't. He never mentions like physical differences or like even seems to care. That's I think that's the only time he ever even references the caste system as a whole that I can recall. I have listened to those audiobooks backwards and forwards. It's ridiculous. Um, yeah. So then after that, you have the aircast, and they are like their pilots, and they crew all their void ships. These guys are like really tall and skinny, and funnily enough, they also have hollow bones. Because originally, when this cast was they were like up in the mountains, and for a while they actually even had like membranes between their legs and their arms, and they could glide through air currents. They don't have that anymore. But so now that they're the Imperial have like Voidborn, which are people like humans that have spent generations living in space, either on space stations or spaceships, and so gravity is kind of wonky, kind of it's not normal, right? Like it is maintained at a norm, but there's still instances where you're experiencing a lot of zero G or lower gravity, and so kind of over time it changes you. Kane is not an unreliable narrator. He's backed up. I did a whole thing on this because Amberly fucking. She says that he's a pretty objective observer, and she's fact checking him all the time. And it's like a deathbed confession thing. He has no reason to lie anymore. He doesn't care. He even says that. And I am gonna say something wrong. Just kidding, Eris. I love you. Anyway, so yeah, so they're essentially like how Imperial Voidborn are. They never if they can help it anyway, they never set foot on a planet. Because their bones are so atrophied that they are. Oh, okay. That is a fair counterpoint. He's unreliable because he always undersells himself. That is true. That is true. Kane does undersell himself like all the time. I really need to read more books, man. I haven't. Anyway, I've been stuck on like just listening to the Cane over and over again. But I have like half a dozen other books I've like partially listened to and haven't finished, and I don't know why. I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, so that's why they don't visit a planet's surface, because their bones are hollow, they're atrophied. If they go down and like trip and fall, they could break a leg because their bones are so thin. So yeah. And then finally, you have the ethereal caste, and they are like the undisputed spiritual and political leaders of the empire, the entire empire. Um, and typically, in terms of like appearance, they're kind of they'll lean either between like similar to the water caste or the fire caste in just like general physical appearance. Except they have a diamond shaped bone ridge in their foreheads. Which is, I said earlier, that's kind of like that's also where the Inquisition kind of guesses how they exert their control over the rest of the Tau. Is through whatever is that it's either like a latent psychic thing or it's a pheromone thing. I think it's a psychic thing. I think it has to be. But yeah, so they're the undisputed leaders. And really fun is they don't know where they came from. They're just like way back in Tau history, they just showed up, united the whole species. Nobody knows where they're from, and nobody argues with them. It's like they tell you to do something and you fucking do it, like hands down. So, you know, typically they're you know they're the upper echelons of Tau society. So, you know they're back in their ivory towers. However, when it comes to large military enterprises, well, see, that's the thing, though. I'll respond to that in a sec. The ethereals, you'll occasionally see them in like large military expeditions, and the reason they give is for the fuck is this? Whatever. Anyway, the reason that they give is for morale purposes, like it boosts morale to have the ethereals nearby. And so what Eris is saying is he thinks it's a pheromone thing, seeing as they are basically blanks to the two psychers in the Imperium. Now, while that does make sense in that regard, they just say Tau in general. They don't specifically say the ethereals. And the other thing is too is it's implied to work very subtly, so it might not even need that much like power or presence in the warp to do anything. It could just literally be like an aura of some sort. I don't know. The only reason why I don't like the pheromone theory is that it just doesn't make sense past like a certain point. Like you're like, you know, you have one ethereal in the main command ship, right? So like, sure, you got the commander in there, and they could be loyal to the commander to a point. But at the same time, if you're like, hey, go die by the 1,000 to take this objective, because the greater good says, like, even if they believe in their commander, like they would have to, they have to be like insanely loyal to the greater good as a whole, which they are to a point. But it's like it's spoken about in like fanatical levels. Well, I guess the so fanatical, and some of them are. No, I don't know. I could see. I'd sold myself on it not being pheromones because of that, and now I'm second guessing myself. I also had a third one that third theory I haven't seen a lot of, and then it's just like a hard coded genetic thing. Like that bone ridge is literally all it is it triggers something in the Tau brain to obey. Like it's hard coded into their DNA. I don't know. I thought that was and then you could even say that was done artificially by somebody. Yeah. Yeah, I'm. Yeah, I mean, they really don't give shit for revenue too, and I'm kind of considering just turning them off. I don't know. We'll see. Uh, yeah. So anyway, I was saying I had sold myself on it being psychic. Um, and yeah, I thought my third idea was that it was a genetic thing, and that the bone ridge like triggers something in the Tau brain to make them want to obey, so that you don't have to worry as long as they occasionally look at an ethereal and they see that thing on their head or whatever, they're just like, oh shit, I gotta obey. I don't know. It was an idea. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of like the casts in a nutshell. Um, but yeah, as I said earlier, so there's the Tau species, and then there's the Tau Empire as a whole, which is like a confederation of different species with like the Tau starting it, the ethereals at the top of the pile, and then their member species. So kind of the more common member species that you'll see, especially um, like in warfare, are the Kroot. I really love the Kroot. They're like these big. Oh, see, I should have grabbed a picture of the Kroot. That was one I was forgetting. They're like these big avian, like lanky looking fuckers. I absolutely love their whole lore. It's actually a lore. I did a whole lore thing about them on my my Twitter not or a while ago. I couldn't tell you the day. But yeah, they're like tall, lanky guys with like big beaks, and they almost have like quills sticking out of the back of their head. And they come from a planet where like everything on the planet is also a form of Kroot. Like they ride giant dinosaurs that are Kroot, and yeah, they're great. I love them. They have Kroot hounds. But what's really neat about them, let's see if this shows up actually, or if I can make it show up. Let's see, did that save to the right place? I think what I had to do last time is I had to pause this, exit slideshow, start slideshow. Let's see if that's okay. Looks like it's okay. Maybe. Yeah, there we go. So let's find the Groot picture. There. Oh. There he is. See, it doesn't really have a good beak image. I didn't see that part. But anyway, they're these guys. These are the Kroot. Yeah, Kroot are really neat. Yeah, I like it actually. They're genetically predisposed to respond to their betters. Yeah, see that, and it neatly takes care of them not having a psychic presence, and then you're also not limited to pheromones. Anyway, the Kroot, like I said, are pretty cool. I did a lore thing on them. They're neat. But they have vestigial beaks, light bone structure. They're tall and lanky, but they're actually like really strong because their muscles are dense fiber bundles that allow them, like they have a much higher power to weight ratio. So they might weigh less, but because of the way their muscles are like built, they're much stronger than you would expect. Like way stronger than humans. If I remember right. And they're super dense. And actually, this part I didn't know about how the Tau encounter the Kroot, so this was a neat thing to learn about. Oh, actually, I need to mention the one big thing about Kroot is that they they eat their dead as like a sign of respect, and they eat their enemies to they absorb memories, and they will absorb the best genetic aspects of that species too. I didn't know if you know that. And so they'll start taking on like personality traits too of that species. Not like hard, but a little bit. So Kroot who eat a lot of orcs become more like aggressive and warlike and whatever. Kroot who eat a bunch of Dark Eldar become like more sinister and cunning, and like it's a whole thing. It's great. I love the Kroot. This part I didn't know about them. So they were first encountered during the first sphere expansion for the Tau. and they were being attacked in their war spheres, which their starships are these big fucking spheres, war spheres. They were under attack by a huge orc fleet, and for a while the Tau just like sat there, kind of watching this happen because they were new to the galaxy. And then eventually they felt so bad for the Kroot that they jumped in and started fucking up the orcs with the Kroot. What they didn't know is that this was actually like a scouting assault force, and it turned into this huge war that lasted a decade. Which the Tau fully invested themselves into to help the Kroot. And so at the end of this, the Kroot signs a treaty with the Tau to serve with them for a price. They're mercenaries still. They get paid. In what they don't say, but they have a price. They get regular payments. So they're kind of the more common. They call them auxiliaries, I believe, but the member species are the big ones. You'll see a lot of the Kroot. Auxiliaries in there in the military structure, anyway. So then the next most common you'll see are the Vespid, and they're like these little, they're like insect people. They're kind of neat. Their story's a little, I guess, contentious with some members of the 40k community. Kind of like how people will get butthurt about talking about how the ethereals were and all that stuff. Restart the slideshow again. Bam. So I can show you the Vespid. Yeah, so there's this insectoid race. Where is that picture? I just put it in here. Where are you? There they are. So yeah, they're insect people. And they're like native to a gas giant named Vespid. They can fly, and they're very maneuverable, and they'll use them as like scout or like fast assault troops. Yes, that's the other thing too. So the Kroot cannibalism or whatever is it's built, and that's the other thing too. Is it's a societal thing. It's built into their culture, and so the Tau know that they do it. They don't like it, but they don't do anything to stop it. Which is what Eris is bringing this up. Is Kane describes the Kroot during their eating. They're doing their eating of corpses, and then by saying the Tau look away in shame and disdain, which is true. They don't like that they do it, but they don't do anything to stop them. But yeah, as with the Vespid though, they're like still be used as like scouts. They'll usually put them alongside like battle suit squads, and they're used as rapid assault troops. However, when the Tau first like discovered them, they could barely communicate with them, because the way the Vespid communicated was so beyond what they had, like what they could conceive. The most that they were able to do was to like set up a trade agreement. Because the Vespid, the planet, had like certain very rare but useful crystals that only the Vespid could get to, and so they had some trade agreements and whatever. The Ethereals didn't like this because they wanted to bring them into the greater good. So, and this is where kind of the I've heard that people complain about it is the Communion Helm. This was like the Ethereals are like, we need a way to communicate with this species, and they told the Earthcast to do this. So what they came up with were these Communion Helms, which were basically helmets that they put on whatever they determined a Vespid to be the leader, and then it translates the communication to the Vespid in a way that can be understood. The Vespid don't have enough coverage in the lore that I've encountered, unfortunately. If I'm wrong, please. Not in any of the books. I have not seen the Vespid brought up much in the books. Even Damocles, I can't recall any particular like mentions of the Vespid, which is kind of criminal because they're kind of neat too. It's just like a concept. I mean, to be fair, I didn't really remember a lot about them myself, but that's partially because they really don't get a lot of love in the lore. So, but they are kind of cool. But yeah, so the Earthcast makes these communion helms. Yeah. The communion helms I knew were more recent. But anyway, so they made these helms. They gave them to the Vespid, like their leader of like squad or whatever. But the first communion helm was given to Vespid, and as soon as they put it on, they were supposedly they just instantly understood the greater good and their place within it. And they joined the Empire like immediately. The Inquisition thinks that there's it's more mind control. It's a device to exert control over the Vespid rather than just a straight communication device. But they've never been able to recover one to prove that, I guess. But yeah, those are kind of the second most common ones that you'll see. Auxiliaries within the Tau Armed Forces. Now the third most common would be the humans that have left the Empire, the Imperium, and have joined the Tau Empire for one reason or another. And typically those come in two different flavors. The ones who willingly join for ideological reasons, and then the Imperial Armed Forces who are captured during the war, as well, and their children. Because usually when you have this huge, like, Astra Militari regiments are basically deployed forever. And it's kind of like if you think about a medieval army, they had like a wagon train, right, where it was just like it was all the knights' wives and kids and their random bullshit. Well, it's covered in the Gaunt's Ghost books. There's a similar thing with Imperial Guard regiments, where like they'll have a ship where all this the non-combatants, Imperial Guardsmen's kids and their non-serving wives or whatever, live and are safe while the Guardsmen are off at war. So, same idea here. So they're those kids that survive the war after being captured, usually end up joining the Tau for through propaganda, mind washing, all that good shit. Now, generally, after being conquered, they do have issues with rebels and stuff like that. But with the way the Tau work, they send the watercast through, and they basically just make friends with everybody. And that helps a lot with rebellion because you're not going around kicking down doors. And as long as you have like a handful of sympathizers in the human population who are willing to rat out the non-sympathetic ones in the community for re-education or liquidation, depending on their mood, then it eventually it self-polices. And this is why I was saying earlier they are definitely authoritarian and collectivist, not communist though. But yeah, so that's how they kind of get their foot in the door. And then when they start using Tau technology and how it's so much better than the Imperium's, like it's safer, it's cleaner, it's more, whatever. Just generally better in every way, fortunately. Yeah. Well, thank you. But yeah, and then so that's kind of their big thing is they'll conquer a world and then they take the the carrot approach. approach. And eventually, like, I mean, you take over a country and then all of a sudden you're like, hey, here's all this really cool shit. And your life just in general gets better. You might be angry that you were conquered, but you'll probably get over it pretty quick. And if you don't, then your kids will, or their kids. So, but yeah. Now, now a fun thing that I mentioned it way at the start of the video is they do have to follow the greater good. However, they are still allowed to worship the God Emperor, which is I think is funny. They do try to discourage that over time, but it's not like outright forbidden. You can still worship the God Emperor and be in the Tau Empire, which is funny. So, anyway, so another member species, and this one actually, while you don't really, at least I haven't seen them in the auxiliaries, they are brought up in their biggest ships are piloted by the Demiurge, which is who I'm talking about now. And they're basically their squats or leagues of Votan, operating as a prospect, which is essentially it's a large it's almost like a fleet like a fleet-based city sort of, or like culture for this particular chunk of the leagues of, but they're squats, they're space dwarves, and they actually ended up. This is the source of like where the Tau got all their ion weaponry is through the Demiurge. And I believe they also command like their biggest like battleships, which they call merchantmen, or the Imperium calls merchantmen, and they're like a cross between a battleship and like a planetary, like almost like a battle barge kind of in concept, except like bigger. I believe maybe the same size, but it's the same concept where it's like it's a battleship with the ability to do like planetary landings and also used for trade. So they're called merchantmen. So yeah, just kind of an interesting thing. And there's like 3 or 4 others that are literally like they have one sentence each. Like they have dog people, and that's all it says is that they're dog people, effectively. And there's a few others in there too that are like that. But those are the 4 big ones, the 4 ones that there's actual information on anyway. So yeah. But yeah. So aside from all that stuff, now we're getting into the real fun shit, and this is going to be the Tau, their war gear, their weapons and armor. Then I'm going to go into like the super fun shit, and that's their vehicles, where I'll talk about some of the more common and iconic battle suits that we've seen pass through this little montage I got going here. But to start, we're going to go through their war gear. So the Fire Warrior armor, you'll see coming through here. That's the stuff in the yellow. You'll see in this next image, bottom left. And so that's just their basic bitch. They call it combat armor, and then all Fire Warriors wear that. And it has 2 layers. So the outer layer is a hard, ultra dense nanocrystalline metal veneer bonded to an inner layer of high performance thermal set molecular polyurethane. And it's fancy for real good, real light armor. The outer layer, which is that ultra dense nanocrystalline, is Pheotach, and is used, and it's basically that's the armor they use on everything. So not just combat armor; it's on their battle suits. It's what their tanks are made out of. Their aircraft and their spacecraft too. I believe they also use this stuff. So it's basically all armor across the Tau Empire is this stuff, to one degree or another. But yeah, so it's very lightweight. It's actually, I believe, they equate it to, at least on vehicles, in battlesuits, they equate it to being about as good, about the same defense-wise as ceramite. It's much, much lighter, like way lighter. So think of, I think the closest comparison you can come to is think of like a like a ceramic ballistic plate versus like a sheet of steel. You know, might be the same thickness. It might do the same thing, but one of them is way lighter than the other. It's the same idea. Um, but yeah, typically with like fire warriors, you'll see they'll have that big pauldron on their left shoulder, and what that is it's a small, effectively a small shield. So when they get into position, they line up that shoulder, they put their rifle up, and then it's supposed to give them, you know, better protection from the enemy shooting at them because they have a bigger, thicker plate of this armor. Not always, but typically. Yeah. And then so you'll have like recon armor, which is it's the same material except it's built with freedom of movement and stealth in mind. So it has like energy absorbent padding for energy reduce or for energy dispersal. And then they also wear like like specific special. Oh, that stuck up on me. Excuse me. Whew. They wear like specially designed fatigues that have like sound absorbing fibers built into them, so that just adds to another layer to their stealthiness. So the armor's built for it, and then they actually have some extra enhancements that make them quieter, make them harder to spot in like thermal imaging, that sort of stuff. But yeah, that's like their basic bitch armor for their infantry. So moving from there, let's go to like their standard infantry rifle. So I kind of broke down their weaponry into like different categories because individually they have a lot of different weapons, but they all kind of function. They're all kind of like under one method of function. So starting, we're going to talk about pulse weapons. So that's when you'll see the fire warriors infantry with those big long rifles. Those are pulse rifles. Let's see. There we go. So that one. Pause that. No, come back. Come back. Now. Where is it? I gotta find it again. There it is. Yeah. So, yeah, so they have pulse rifles, pulse carbines, and a pulse blaster. So the pulse rifle is like this is what's pictured here. It's the iconic fire warrior rifle. It's the pulse rifle. But it has like crazy long range, and it has great damage output. It almost looks similar to like a plasma gun, like an Imperial plasma gun, but unlike the Imperial plasma gun, it's exceptionally safe and reliable for the user. Like they do not overheat or explode. But interestingly, while it is an infantry weapon, it is functions closer to like a mass accelerator because they have two magazines. One is like a power pack, high density power pack, and the other holds ferromagnetic slugs, which get fed into the chamber. Then it gets turned into plasma via electromagnetic induction, and then it gets accelerated out of the barrel. So it's kind of interesting that they have two magazines. Now the energy magazine can be, depending on whatever suit that they're wearing, so like a battle suit or a vehicle, can have its power fed directly from the reactor. But the slugs still have to be, those magazines do still have to be swapped out. So yeah, and that's just like a really easy like rundown of how their pulse weaponry works. So then you have the pulse carbine, which is basically the same thing as the rifle, except it's a carbine. It's cut down. It's built for mobility. Then you have the pulse blaster, which is it's a pulse shotgun. Yeah, so it's the same concept of these slugs being superheated into plasma and then being accelerated out of the barrel, except it's a fucking shotgun. Then you also have burst cannons, which are basically it's a quad-barreled pulse carbine in function. So it has a stupidly high rate of fire, about the same range as the carbine. But yeah, the crazy rate of fire kind of makes up for that. Obviously, it's like, oh yeah, this minigun only fires 5.56. Oh, but it's putting out 4,000 rounds a minute. Yay! Except in this case, it's plasma. Yay! Yeah. So those are pulse weapons. So another big, like the next kind of big weapon system that you'll see a lot with Tau that they really like a lot are they're like rail weaponry. So you'll see like rail infantry size rail rifles, or you'll see like huge vehicle mounted versions, which is, if you're not sure what a rail rifle is, it's a ballistic weapon, so it fires a projectile using electromagnetically induced linear acceleration, and it fires a projectile at hypersonic speeds. So it has a stupidly impressive range and just a crazy amount of damage that it can do. And its obvious advantage in that is because it has insane armor penetration, because it's a dense projectile fired at hypersonic speeds. To the point of where it can punch through Terminator armor without even with ease, even at long distances, and through like bunkers, or like heavily fortified positions. These rail guns can just blow the projectile through. Yeah, and it's obviously scares the shit out of the Imperial Guard, because it's like, oh, I'm safe in my bunker, and then your head is vaporized because some asshole with a rail rifle shot around through the side of your bunker. Yeah. Space Marines actually hate it even more, because the amount of damage that it exerts against Space Marines will actually destroy the progenoid glands. Like, will completely annihilate gene seed. So you're doing like permanent damage to Space Marine chapters that, either can't get more gene seed, or they just, whatever. So yeah, it's kind of a big deal for the Space Marines especially. But anyway, so yeah, so you'll also see them like mounted on certain vehicles and battle suits. So yeah. So they also then have fusion weapons. In terms of like function, it's like similar to like a Melta. So it's short range, does a shit ton of damage against armor, and it also, like, the closer you are to the target, the more damage it does. Just in general, you'll see them on battle suits a lot, because pilots have mastered the combined use of it with their jetpacks. So they'll basically boost into like an armored formation, hose down a bunch of armor with their fusion weapons, and then they will zip away. So it's a fantastic anti-armor weapon in that sense, because they can get in and get in, fuck shit up, and get out really fast. Usually before whoever they're messing with, before they can even respond. Typically, excuse me. Actually, I thought I would. Well, I do a lot. Oh, vehicles is where there's a lot more shit. So there is a fusion cannon, which you'll see on like the Hammerhead gunships, which have a bit more range than the fusion weapons on like battle suits and wielded by infantry. So I mentioned these weapons before, and it's those provided by the Demiurge, and that's the ion weapons. So this is when the Tau and the Demiurge first like got together. There's a lot of diplomacy going back and forth, and the Demiurge traded their knowledge of ion weaponry to the Tau, or something, I don't know what. However, it has an extremely long range, and it emits high energy ion streams to destroy its target. So you'll see them on hammerhead gunships, the Barracuda superiority fighter, tiger sharks, morays, and mantas. Those are all aircraft. And usually they're like powerful enough to deal with any sort of infantry as well as light vehicles. Not as great against like heavier armored targets. That's what the railgun is for. What they make up for that is like they have an insanely high rate of fire. Now there's a large experimental version of it that's mounted on one of their battle suits, the XV-104 Riptide, and that one is actually like insane. That one can fuck up even heavily armored targets. But one of the last variants that they have that there is of the ion stuff or ion weaponry is this I can't talk right now. The cyclic, whatever, ion blaster. That's usually on XV8 battlesuits, and it's basically just a multi-barreled ion blaster. But you'll only see them on like veteran XV8 battlesuit, like pilot or XV8 battlesuits that are piloted by veterans because they're still kind of experimental. So you only see like one of them, or like Hunter Cadre. I don't know why I can't fucking pronounce shit right now. My mouth is rebelling. It doesn't like me. So yeah, in addition to their energy weaponry, they also like missiles a lot and drones. Missiles and drones. But in this case, missiles they will also be mounted on their battle suits. You'll see them on their vehicles and aircraft. And you'll usually see like missile pods strapped to like XV8 crisis suits like on their shoulders. The XV-88 broadsides usually can have them, and the XV-88s use high yield pods, and those were actually developed when the Tau were first like fighting the orcs, and because they couldn't deal with like the mass assault tactics of the orcs, so like because they all use like lightly armored like fast vehicles. Not always, but that's the vast majority of them. And so these rail rifles would just blast through these shitty orc vehicles, and it's like, cool, you got one. Well, there's like 30 others that you still haven't dealt with. So they came up with these high yield missile pods, and that's kind of a bigger thing with the Tau too. Is they'll see a threat and they'll deal with it, and they'll actually they'll develop technology fairly quickly to deal with it, and that's pretty. Like, that's kind of another cool aspect that they'll have. That's actually the Riptide I mentioned earlier was developed because of encountering the Imperium with Titans and Knights and stuff like that. So, but anyway, they have a few different missiles that they like to use. So there's the Smart Missile System, and it fires clusters of small missiles with drone processors built into them. So basically, drones have... Like, you'll see the little flying dinner plates with guns. They have like they're basically programmed. It's not AI, but it's sort of in that direction. But yeah, so they basically will take one of these processors and put it into these little missiles, and they fire them in huge swarms. And they're programmed specifically to go after infantry behind cover. So if you have like a really entrenched enemy, like say a bunch of trenches, like literally just a bunch of trenches, you have a bunch of enemy troopers in it, well, you'll fire off a fuck ton of these little smart missiles, and they will they will look for infantry, adjust their trajectory, and go right for it. So it's to clear out infantry and cover. They don't have a huge lot of range, and they don't have a lot of power. I'd say probably in the realm of like a grenade. Which is, in perspective of a missile, it's not a lot, but when you're fucking up entrenched enemy positions and you can unleash swarms of these things, then it's scary. So, yeah. Then they'll also have, then they have seeker missiles, which are larger. They're like a single high-strength missile, and that's kind of like what the Tau use for artillery, because they don't have like howitzers or field cannons or even like static. They don't have static artillery emplacements at all. Like that's a big part of like Tau warfare is mobility. Mobility. That's why they use battle suits. That's why they don't have hard like in-place artillery. You know, that's why all their shit hovers. Like, yeah, they're all about staying on the move constantly. But yeah, anyway, so as close as you get to like tower artillery, that's their seeker missiles, and they'll use like they call it a marker light, and it's just like a really advanced target painter, and the seeker missile will go right for it. You'll usually see these on like the Skyray gunships. Now, funnily enough, while the Tau have pulse weaponry, this gets really stupid. So the Tau have pulse weaponry, right? Which kind of looks like a plasma gun, but doesn't function the same as a plasma gun, right? Well, then they also just have straight up plasma weapons, and these are actually like plasma weapons. Like they directly, like it's basically the same thing as an Imperial plasma gun, but again, they are much more reliable to the point of where they almost never catastrophically overheat and explode. Now, the trade-off for that is they do overall less damage than an Imperial plasma gun. However, like slightly less damage for way more reliability is a pretty fantastic trade-off. So, yeah. There's also vehicle-mounted versions of it that you'll see. So you'll see them on Hammerhead gunships a lot. But they are exactly what a plasma gun is. They fire bolts of superheated matter to the point of it becoming like a burning gaseous state, and it's the same destructive heat as like what you'd find on the surface of the sun, or close to. Very, very destructive. So yeah, not just to add a little confusion in with Tau stuff. They have pulse weapons, which are essentially a different type of plasma gun, and then they also have plasma guns, which are then functionally the same as Imperial plasma guns. Because reasons. They need two plasma guns, but one of them is a pulse gun, because they say so. You know, whatever. So, yeah. So, that's just kind of like very general overview of like different weapon types, their how their armor works, that sort of thing. Now, the real fun part is where we get into their vehicles. So when I'm going to talk about vehicles, I'm going to talk about the three main categories that they have. Like my last ones, I'm not doing spacecraft, otherwise this thing would be way longer, and honestly, even though I'm moving along a bit faster than I thought it would be, yeah, the vehicle section took me a long time. If I had to do spacecraft, I would lose my shit. But Tau vehicles take three different forms, typically, with their land forces. So we have battle suits, grav vehicles, and just aircraft in general. There's a couple of things that I put into the aircraft category that they're not strictly aircraft, like they can go excuse me, in and out of atmosphere. And one of them actually is straight up a void ship, which, if you know anything about the Tau, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. In fact, there's a picture of it right there. Although that might be a little behind from I actually said that. Whatever. There's a picture of it floating around. Anyway. So yeah. Anyway, so my favorite category of their war gear are their battle suits. Which you've seen a lot. A lot of the art here has their battle suits, because I think. So their battle suits are typically bipedal walker units, and there's a wide range of them. Standard one, the XV8, the most common one that you'll see, is about the same height as a Space Marine Dreadnought, not anywhere near as wide, and they're also extremely maneuverable. So most Tau battle suits, except for the super heavy ones, see there's a little chart of the different size ones. most, not all Tau battlesuits will have jetpacks. On top of being a lot lighter because of the armor that I mentioned earlier. So they're super maneuverable, and then they have jetpacks on top of that to assist that. Now, interestingly, unlike power armor, where like you're wearing it as an armor, it's like to the skin kind of deal. Tau battlesuits are different. So the pilot in the suit. So the reason why the battlesuit chests are like big and boxy is that is actually where the pilot is inside the chest, and they're usually rolled up in the fetal position within the central torso, so like behind all the thickest armor, but also kind of near the reactor, which in certain suits is kind of a problem. And then they're connected to the suit through a monofilament needle inserted through the back of the pilot's head. So this part I didn't know is it disrupts the pilot's nervous system, and it disconnects their brain from their body from the neck down, and then just pumps those impulses into the battlesuit itself. So you completely lose all sensation of your body from the neck down. And so what's interesting about that too is with like Imperial Knight pilots and Titan Princeps, they don't, it's not quite like, it is still like a very deep connection, but it's not to the point of where their body is completely useless. Like they still use their hands and shit, but with the Tau battlesuits, like while they're in these things, their bodies are paralyzed from the waist down, is what that translates to. However, they don't feel any pain when they take damage, whereas the Titan pilots do, which I think is, like, they call it a phantom pain, or whatever. Psychosympathetic wounding, I think is what it is. Anyway. However, with the Tau battlesuit pilots, that doesn't happen with them. They don't feel the pain when their suit gets damaged. They'll have like kind of phantom pain. What's really fun though is their veteran pilots can have like long-lasting psychological problems. So, like as an example, when the head of a suit is destroyed, the pilots will sometimes have to spend months in a coma to recover from the trauma. Because it's like, your head gets blown off, but it doesn't actually get blown off. And then there's another thing where like when they've retired later on in life, they'll try to jump because they should be able to fly or whatever, do the different things that they could do in their battle suit, because they're literally turning it into their body through their nervous system, which is something I didn't know. And I knew that they sat in the chest. I just wasn't exactly sure how that worked out. So, now the most common battlesuit you see, and that's most of the ones you'll see in this reel here, is the XV8. I've mentioned it a couple of times, and it actually has a bunch of different variants on top of that. However, it is the most widely used battlesuit, and it's because it has a huge array of weapons that you can put on it. So all those weapon categories I listed off before, you can find the battlesuit equivalent on an XV8, and they're designed to be almost, I don't want to say modular, but they're designed to be able to swap weapons pretty rapidly depending on the situation. So they're very versatile, they're very well armored, they're very maneuverable, they have fucking jump packs, and you can put a crazy different amount of heavy weaponry on these things. And it's that same nanocrystalline alloy, and like I said before, it's about the same protection as ceramite, but it's a lot lighter. They also have access to, the XV8s will have access to a multi-tracker, which is like an advanced fire control system, shield generators, and the battlesuits are also, all of them are only piloted, I think, except with the exception of the stealth suits. I could be wrong though. But all of them are piloted by like veteran fire warriors. And these are fire warriors that have been on the front lines for at least 4 years, and then they have to go through a trial of fire, and then they can actually be battlesuit pilots. And it's a thing that like all fire warriors aspire to, which, I mean, you can blame them. aside from the psychological trauma anyway, the battlesuits are pretty fucking cool. They're my favorite aspect of the Tau technology, just in general. It's just the battlesuits. I love the battlesuits. Anyway, so the heavy weapon version of the XV8 is the XV88 broadside. So it loses the jetpacks, has heavier armor. However, it swaps all that out for like very, very heavy weaponry. Like very heavy weaponry. So let's see, I'm gonna roll it back here. So yeah, so this guy right here, this is what's considered the older version of the XV88 battlesuits. And these guys have like 2 heavy rail rifles on their shoulders, and then they have to entrench, so they lock their toes into the ground. And then these lower, and then they can be fired because the recoil is so freaking heavy. These are also the broadside, the XV88s you'll see in like the Dawn of War games. And then they have missile pods in the hands as their secondary. Now, the more recent versions of the broadside, where is it? This guy. Is this guy. So instead of the shoulder-mounted heavy rail guns, they have like it's more like a rifle, infantry rifle carry, and then they have usually like a secondary weapon system on their back. So in this case, like this looks like a secret missile system. But yeah, that other one is how I know the XV88s with the big shoulder-mounted rail rifles. But yeah. But again, even then, so the XV88s are then piloted by veteran pilots of the XV8s. So you're getting even more elite in terms of their usage. And that's because they're more specialized, they're more vulnerable. They do have heavier armor. However, they're more focused in what they do. So they're anti-armor, like uses anti-armor support. And so with those rail rifles, they can just ping shit from super far away. Usually by spotting by fire warriors that are in closer, and with crazy amount of accuracy. So the other thing is too, since it is a derivative of the XV8, it is also built for versatility. So you can swap out those rails for, you know, twin-linked high-yield missile pods to plasma rifles and a few other things. But they are the heavier variants. They also can be accompanied by drones. Tau love drone technology. You'll see them everywhere. Like I said, they're the little flying dinner plates with guns, although not all of them have guns. So they will sometimes have drones, and those drones, it could be a shield drone, a marker drone, which is a target painter drone, a gun drone, which is a flying gun, and then the XV88s in particular will also have missile drones. So yeah. They also have a commander variant of the XV8s. And this is because Tau commanders, when they tend to lead from the front, they get very zealous, and so they get exposed to the enemy, or they were getting exposed to the enemy a lot, and so their attrition rate with their commanders was very, very high. So they made 2 different variants specifically for Tau commanders. So the XV81 and the XV80 or the XV85 enforcer suit. So the 81 is outfitted with a smart missile system, and so that way they can provide long-range fire support for the troops. But otherwise, it's basically an XV8. It's just it has more CNC systems. That's command and control for you civilians out there. And then is outfitted with like a longer range missile system, so they could still be kind of up in the front lines, but not leading from the front. Now, the Enforcer, then the XV85, it's larger and sleeker than the XV8 and has better protection and just joint movement for the pilot in general. So it's better armored, quicker response times, and it also has a larger reactor built into it. So it can mount heavier more weapon systems and support systems, and it is so distinct in its look that any like it's respected and feared by enemies, and inspiring to the troops, because it's the guy who's in that is like a warrior of renown, because this particular suit is only given out to like the best of the best commanders who want them. So yeah, so whoever's in that thing is a badass, and the suit itself is pretty badass in general. So so there's actually really small battle suits, and for some reason I never thought the stealth suits were like battle suits, but I guess they consider them battle suits. They just look like the armor. I don't know, whatever. But they have the XV-25 stealth suits. So those are like, it's the smallest type of battle suits they have. Here, I'll leave it on this chart for a little bit. So it's the armor right down there in the red. So second from the left, that's the stealth suits. And they're built exactly for the purpose that you would think, for stealth. So they're a little bit better, a little bit taller than a fire warrior, and then embedded within the suits are systems designed to bend light around them in order to effectively render them invisible to the naked eye, and then as a bonus, it'll shield them from thermal sensors. So it's like this armor is just top notch when it comes to stealth and infiltration. So they use it to slip through enemy lines, so destruction in key areas, scouting, deep behind enemy lines, and then ambushing targets. So all the things you'd expect from like a covert stealth force. Now what's interesting is that you'll see there's a variant of the stealth armor called the XV-22 stealth armor, and that is handed out specifically to Tau commanders. So you'll see them in XV, like the XV-8 battle or the XV-85s and stuff like that. But then so like Shadow Sun, this is her right here. That's a suit of XV-22 stealth armor. See, and then they call this a battle suit, but there's no way she's just chilling in the chest, right? Like that's power armor. See, that's am I crazy? Maybe I'm crazy. No, I think I'm right. Another one of the XV-22. I thought I did. Nope. Seeing it. I thought I had grabbed a couple, but I guess I just have the one. Whatever. Yeah, see, that's an XV-8 back there. This is a suit that I actually won't talk about because there's so much I had to skip it. That's not it. That's not it. Whatever. Anyway. So the XV-22 is a variant of the stealth suits it's used for commanders, and it does also have a jetpack. So that's cool. And it's also like more advanced in general than the XV-25, which is why you only see it with commanders, as well as being able to carry heavier armaments than the more mass-produced XV-25s. So those are like the most common variants of the Tau battlesuits. Those are the ones you'll see the most on the battlefield. However, they do get a little larger. So the first one is a truly awe-inspiring battlesuit, the XV-104 Riptide. So it stands about twice the height of an XV-8. And this one I know I got a picture of. Where are you? That's an 8. Nope, nope. Where are you, Riptide? I know you're in here. That's not it. It's the ghost keel. There it is. Oh, yeah. Riptide? No, that's the Riptide. There she is. Sorry, took me a second. So yeah, so that's the XV-104 Riptide. So it's twice the size of an XV-8, and they do also have jet packs. And the pilots within these guys are like the tippy top of veterans. Like, these guys are the best of the best that you can find in battlesuit pilots. You know, many years on the battlefield, many years piloting battlesuits. Those are the only ones allowed to get in the XV-104s. Now, the interesting thing about these guys is these and another one that I'm going to talk about were developed specifically because of the Tau's run-in with the Imperium and having the Titans sent against them. And they're like, oh shit, we need to deal with, you know, the Imperium's big-ass war machines that they had no real counter for, except for the Manta, which I'll bring up. But in comparison, you know, even then, the Titans were crazy, so they had to come up with these heavier battle suits. This one being the 104 Riptide. So the 104 Riptide has a reactor that's unique in comparison to the rest of them. It's called a dark matter nova reactor. Now, these originally are meant for exclusively for the Tau starships, and it wasn't until the Earthcast was able to miniaturize it specifically for the suit. Like, this is the smallest this type of reactor's gotten for the suit. And it provides a crazy amount of power for these suits to function, because they're outfitted with a heavy burst cannon or an ion accelerator. So these are like, you know, huge weapons that it uses, puts out a prodigious amount of fire, does a ton of damage. And then they also have the Riptide shield generator, which in standard function is a little bit weaker than a regular Tau shield generator. However, you can overcharge the generator with the Nova reactor, and the shield that it can produce from that is incredibly strong, incredibly resilient. So during the Damocles Gulf Crusade, during one of the Tau assaults, this is one of the first times the Riptides were being used in battle. The Imperium shot a bunch of Death Strike missiles at them, which I don't think they're straight nukes. Maybe they are. They're big exploding missiles. Into the middle of this advancing Tau army, which happened to have a Riptide in the middle of it. So the Riptide fucking cranks up its reactor, overcharges the shield generator, and other than some scorching on the armor plate, it was completely fine, whereas everything else was like wiped off the face of the planet from these death strikes. So the shield generator is no fucking joke. It's when it's fully overcharged, it's almost impenetrable. Now, there's a big downside to this reactor, and it is that when you do overcharge it, there's a chance of it emitting extremely lethal radiation. And actually it does, from what I recall, it does leak out some radiation regardless, to the point of where they call it donning the mantle of the hero, because they know they're basically sacrificing themselves by using this thing. Because eventually it's going to kill them from the radiation. So it's donning the hero's mantle, if I'm remembering correctly. So, yeah. Extremely powerful suit. But you're probably going to die using it. Eventually. Either from battle or just because the radiation makes you grow a new butthole and then you shit out your heart and die. That was a little graphic, I'm sorry. I'm not really sorry, I was pretty proud of that. Leave me alone. So, that's the Riptide. So, while we're on the topic of big battle suits, the next one I'm going to talk about is the XV-95 Ghost Keel. which is... Where are you? Oh, what's the next one I'm going to talk about? Where are you, Ghost Keel? Oh, where are you? You're in here. Bitch! There it is. That's a Ghost Keel right there. So, the Ghost Keel, these are like the pinnacle of Tau stealth technology. So they take the technology of the XV-25 stealth suits, the little guys, and they crank it up to 11. And then make them big. They make them bigger. So these guys actually are even taller than the XV-8s, and I believe they're taller than the Riptide. Yeah. But anyway, so it's like has the most advanced electronic warfare technology that Tau has to offer, the best sensors, like the very peak of electronic warfare equipment and sensory equipment and stealth equipment is in these suits. So much so that they actually have AI built into it to help manage all the systems because the pilot can't handle it on their own. And yes, the Tau does use AI, which the Mechanicus absolutely hates them for, unsurprisingly. Anyway, so yeah, so these suits have to have AI to help control them. They also, in certain ways, look like the XV-22 battlesuit, stealth suit, commander armor a little bit in appearance, except these are like full-on walkers. Like these things can stealth just like the XV-25s, so they bend light around them, make them like almost perfectly invisible. Then on top of this, they have built-in jamming arrays and audio dampeners. So imagine like a giant fucking walker that's completely silent and invisible and is blocking radar on top of that. Then give it a couple of stealth drones to help supplement its own stealth field on top of that. Like, this is a stealthy big-ass boy. Right. And then they're armed with a cyclic ion raker, which is built... Well, they usually have two weapons. The raker and then a fusion collider. So the raker is a multi-barreled weapon, and it just spits out insane fire. Like an insane amount of rate of fire, and it'll vaporize huge hordes of infantry, like, quickly. Light or heavy, it doesn't matter. Just eats them for breakfast. Now, what's the most fun weapon this thing can be outfit with is the fusion collider. And it employs subatomic agitation to superheat its targets. So, like, it's basically a microwave gun, except it works on armor. So it will, like, melt armor. It'll vaporize living vehicles or living creatures. And other than the sound of the exploding vehicles or the cooking off ammo, like, the weapon itself is, like, silent. So it goes, like, perfect, but it's closer range, but it goes perfectly with the stealth suit. So it'll just, like, it'll melt you before you even know it. Yeah, so it's pretty nuts. Pretty fucking nuts. The Ghost Keel is crazy. Find the last battlesuit I'm going to talk about here. Oh, there it is. So this beautiful thing is the XV-128 Storm Surge. So this is also one of the other battlesuits built to counteract Titans. And this took place during the Damocles Gulf Crusade. That was what's known by the Imperium, and then it's also known as the third. It's known as the Third Sphere expansion by the Tau. And these guys were built also in direct response to the Titans, because really they didn't have much of a counter to them. Like, they have the Mantas, which I will cover, but otherwise, like, they had no real. None of their battlesuits could do much against the Titans. So they created the Storm Surge. And as you can see, it's more of a walking gun tower than it is like a battlesuit. I mean, it is a battle suit because it's bipedal, but it's basically a walking gun tower. Um, so unlike all the other battle suits, the Storm Surge actually has 2 pilots. And it also has 2 reactors because the weapons that are mounted on this thing you usually find on like their starship caliber. And so they have one power plant for the suit and all its systems, and then they have a power plant purely dedicated to its weapons systems. So yeah, and usually they'll have one of 2 heavier weapons. So they'll have a pulse driver cannon or a pulse blast cannon. These are like some of the largest pulse weapons that the Tau Empire fields. So the driver cannon is like basically it's a super long range plasma gun, except it's pulse, so it's a projectile, whatever. And it could go great distances. Now, then you have the blast cannon. Same idea, except instead of it being like one projectile that flies out there and explodes, it actually will disperse the farther away the target is. So after a certain distance, it turns into like almost like it's a blast of plasma, which is great for just clearing out obviously a lot of different things, really. And then it also will have secondary weapon systems, so twin link smart missiles, missile systems, flamers, burst cannons, or some of them will even have like air bursting fragmentation projectors, which is it's just a flat gun, really. And then they'll also have cluster rocket systems, which are like a scaled up version of the smart missiles. So those are like the little drone controlled missiles, except they're larger. And then they'll have destroyer missiles, which are the same as the seeker missiles, the target painted ones, except they're AI guided instead of drone guided. So they're even more precise, almost like tricky in a sense because they can evade and whatever. So, oh lordy, I wish I wasn't so tired. My mouth is getting tired from talking too fucking much. Oh lord. Anyway, so that's kind of like touching on all the more famous battle suits, because there's a lot more. In fact, one of the pictures I have in this roll is one of the ones I'm not talking about, because I wanted to make sure I could cover a little bit of everything. But if you're interested, look up Tau battle suits. There's a lot there, and it's very cool, especially if you're like a big robot fan or mech fan, whatever. Anyway, so that's kind of the last of the battle suits I'll talk about. Now, the more like their vehicles, their ground vehicles, I categorize them as grav vehicles because nothing they have has tracks or wheels. It's all anti-gravity technology. Everything fucking hovers, like speeders. So that's why their whole like vehicle section is, I call them grav vehicles. See, that's the one I was talking about that I'm not going to talk about now. Not that one. Anyway, so everything has anti-gravity technology vehicle wise. So there's support vehicles, they're tanks, they're IFVs, that's infantry fighting vehicles for civilians, everything. And actually, one thing I wanted to mention too before I forget, their jump packs are a mix of like a jet turbine, and they also have some anti-gravity technology mixed in there as well. Should mention that. It's kind of interesting. But yeah. Anyway, so their most common vehicle that you'll see is the TY-7 Devilfish, and it's used as a troop transport. The internal compartment is fully pressurized. It can carry up to 12 fire warriors or pathfinders, and it works great with the Tau military doctrine of mobility. You know, they can go over basically all terrain, you know, with almost no issue because it's a fucking hovercraft. And it has a pair of multi-directional thruster engines on the rear of the hull. And it has 3 hatches. So it has the rear drop ramp in the back, and then it has doors on the sides of it. Let's see. I tried to make sure I had a picture of just about everything. Where are you, Devilfish? Nope, that's a hammerhead. Even though a hammerhead and a Devilfish are basically the same chassis. I thought I had one of a straight Devilfish. I guess I don't. Shit. Oh well. I'll put it on the hammerhead. That's next on the list anyway. Where are you, hammerhead? Do. There you are. So that's the hammerhead gunship, which I will talk about here in a little bit. But the Devilfish basically looks exactly like that, except it doesn't have the turret on top. It's basically the same thing. And it's used exclusively for troop transport. And so because this thing can go over any terrain, you know, with almost no problem, it plays great into the Tau doctrine, military doctrine of mobility. It does have in the nose there, which on the hammerhead I believe, I can't remember what weapon that is right now, but right under the nose there in the front, usually they'll have a burst cannon, which is which I talked about earlier. It's like a quad barreled rotary cannon pulse weapon, and it's as a single pilot handles the nose gun, communications, and the navigation equipment, and then so you'll see them here on the hammerhead as well. So like the little fins in front with the guns hanging down, the Devilfish can have those too, and sometimes it'll have like other pulse guns in there, or it'll launch drones from those little round spots. So yeah. Anyway, so then from there we have the hammerhead gunship, which is this image right here. So it's the Devilfish, slightly heavier armor because it doesn't transport troops, and then it has a turret-mounted weapon. And so in this case, this variant has, you know, a heavy railgun. That's the most common one you'll see with the Devilfish, but like with the hammerhead. But like basically everything Tau vehicle-wise, they're very modular. They are the hammerhead is effectively the main battle tank of the Tau Empire. And like I said, you'll usually see it mounted with a heavy railgun mounted in the turret because it is an anti-armor vehicle, you know, first and foremost. However, you can see them equipped sometimes with like twin-linked ion cannons or missile pods or plasma cannons, fusion cannons, and long-barreled burst cannons. And then secondary weapons to kind of go up with that. So like twin-linked burst cannons, gun drones, or a smart, like a twin-linked smart missile system. There is a variant of the hammerhead / Devilfish called the Skyray gunship. And so it drops the turret and then it just gives it a bunch of missiles. And that's the closest you'll find to like Tau having artillery is the Skyray missile gunships. They fire like the big Seeker missiles. Like I said, that's the closest they have to an artillery piece is these big missile boats. Which I keep forgetting which things I actually have pictures of and which I don't. Oh fucking well. Anyway, so yeah, if you're looking for artillery, Tau is not the faction to play. All right. So the last section of their vehicles I'm going to cover are their quote-unquote aircraft, and like I said, two of them are not. Actually, I think all of them are not exclusively aircraft. I think I might be wrong on that with one of them, maybe two, but I'm pretty sure they all get deployed. Like they can't be used in space or in the air. I could be wrong. I don't think I am though. But so their main, not their main, but their air superiority fighter is called the Barracuda. It's faster than an Imperial Marauder, which is a bomber. However, it's slower top speed wise than the Imperium's Thunderbolt or Lightning, which is their dedicated aircraft, like the Imperium's dedicated fighter craft. How they make up for this, though, is having superior electronic systems, and the aircast pilots are naturally, typically more talented than human pilots. However, like in terms of like sheer combat experience, Imperium fire pilots are usually far and above better in that sense, depending on the situation. But yeah, so these. Like these are their air superiority fighters. They are outfitted with a pilot-controlled nose-mounted ion cannon, that's what they primarily like to use in dogfighting because it's a high alpha weapon. You just blast the piss out of them. How do I not have all the things that I think I do? I hate it when that happens. I think, yeah, that's a Barracuda in this picture here in the upper kind of mid quadrant there. There we go. That's my picture of the Barracuda. It's all fucking zoomed out, which is annoying. But yeah, so you can kind of see it in the bottom here. That's the ion cannon. And then on the sides, on the wingtips, you have drone-controlled burst cannons. So that's what they use to strafe infantry, and they can use it in air-to-air warfare, but typically for shooting down other aircraft, they like to use the ion cannon. They can also have seeker missiles mounted on them, and however the aircraft can't control them. They have to be controlled from a marker light target painter from the ground. They just kind of launch them, and then the target painter does the rest. So then moving away from a combat role, we have the Orca troop transport, which is a big fat beast of a thing. Again, I keep thinking I have images of shit I don't actually have images of. I didn't spend enough time grabbing pictures, I'm sorry. Oh, here we go. So, this in the top right here is an Orca. You kind of get a view of it. I swear that I had a better one. F it. F it! And the Orca it's a huge troop transport. But it's not designed for like combat drops. This is like a drop ship that you will have, back behind the front lines, so you can just dump off a bunch of troops and then go back into the air and call it a day. So it doesn't have like a ton of armor, and it doesn't have a lot of self-defense options. However, even though it's big and fat, it is actually pretty quick and maneuverable for how large it is, and that's because, like I mentioned earlier, the Tau like to put anti-gravity technology in all of their shit. And then it has these 4 directed ramjets. So those big engines that you saw, those pivot so they can hover in place, and then they're like, yeah. So there's a lot of versatility in those. Yeah. But that's like their main drop ship. So it drops their vehicles, big shit tons of infantry, all that good stuff. So, moving back into a combat role, we have the Tiger Shark, which is their fighter bomber. It's still faster than the Marauder, however, it doesn't have a bomb bay like the Marauder does. It's more rare than the Barracuda, but it has a similar like caliber of electronics, so very good electronic systems. Usually we'll have twin-linked ion cannons, missile pods for ground attacks, and drone-controlled burst cannons. So similar to the Barracuda, it had those cannons on the wingtips that were controlled by drones. However, the big difference between the Tiger Shark and the Marauder, instead of bombs, it launches waves of drones to support the troops on the ground. It's basically a flying drone carrier as a fighter bomber, which is kind of an interesting concept. and it can just drop swarms of these drones to different parts of the battlefield to support the troops on the ground. And as you can imagine, I'm sure you can think of all the fun tactical uses you can get out of that. So, so the last aircraft I wanted to talk about, and this is the one that I mentioned, is actually is actually more of a void ship. There she is. So this, my friends, is the Manta, aka the Manta Missile Destroyer. It's a super heavy craft. It is actually the smallest, like, interstellar void ship that the Tau has, but they use it for atmospheric flight. It's extremely well armored and just has a crazy amount of guns on this fucking thing. It also can hold an entire hunter cadre on its Manta Destroyer equals Tau Titan. Exactly. Yeah. It's basically that was their initial answer to Titans until they started developing their bigger battle suits. But the Manta is still fucking crazy. Because not only does it have all these crazy guns on it, it actually can hold essentially, I think it's an entire Imperial regiment's worth of troops in its hold. On top of that, but the big thing is it has is its main weapons, which you can kind of see under the wings there sticking out, those square rounded protrusions, kind of square rounded. Those are two different things. Whatever. Those are heavy rail cannons, heavy rail guns. However, interestingly, their projectiles are different than like the standard rail guns. So these fire fin stabilized projectiles with drone processors built into them, and they have like fin stabilizers and even like small maneuvering thrusters on these projectiles fired at like hypersonic speeds. And these weapons are so, like, in space, they can be really crazy because if they're far out, they can maneuver themselves to find like the vulnerable points in like ship armor. However, on the ground, there's much shorter distances. It just makes them incredibly accurate. So, to put in perspective, a single salvo from these guns can take down an unshielded Warhound Titan in a single salvo. Just blah, gone. So pretty fucking significant. This is why it's the Titan killer. Yeah. So then from there, they will usually have 10 seeker missile systems, 16 long barrel burst cannon turrets. So they have, and they're positioned. So that's all the like multi-barreled weapons that you're seeing sticking off the sides. Those are the burst cannons. And they're built in such a way that there's always, it's total coverage, and it's always like multiple overlaps between cannons. So it's great, like ground attack. It's great against great for air defense and all that good stuff. But the other cool thing about it too is as far as like the troop deployments. So that whole bottom chunk is one giant elevator. So the Manta will come in, will hover, and then it will drop its belly down all the way to the ground and then unleash a buttload of troops and then pick itself back up and go back to fucking shit up with its big old guns. It's pretty great. So yeah. Oh, ooh, we're at 10:40. I think I might be able to finish on time. Yeah. So those are just kind of the more like famous Tau vehicles. As I said with other things, there's a lot more. So, and then these specific videos anyway are more generalized introductions to factions. So it's just like very generalized, like the more iconic stuff. That's also true. Yeah, can combat drop. The Manta can combat drop troops in their Devilfish troop transports, and actually battle suits too will drop out of them quite frequently. So yeah, there's a lot of utility out of the Manta too, which is kind of in a few different ways is pretty common with the Tau. They always like to have things that can be used for multiple different purposes, which is smart if you think about it, to a point anyway. And the Mantas kind of does that. And then I was talking about the Demiurge merchantmen ships, kind of the same concept. It's both a warship and like a troop transport kind of deal. Yeah. Oh, and it also has energy shields. Yeah, and the hammerheads too. Fucking yeah, scary thought of a main battle tank floating to the ground, ready to make your day worse. So true, so very true. It'll be friendly, right? You know, when it fires a rail cannon or a rail shot through your bunker when it's floating down to the ground. That's what friends do, right? Yeah, they're friendly. They just want to give you death. Oh, and then last thing about the Mantas, they do actually have energy shields, but they're not like void shields, which like basically shunt the damage to the warp. It actually just like straight up deflects ordnance away from it. And there's some other interesting details about Tau shields, and they don't collapse. You can get a good shot though that will penetrate the shield, but they don't like catastrophically collapse like Imperial void shields do. So yeah. So let's see here. I got 3 more sections and then done. So this next one's gonna be kind of brief because it covers like 3 kind of big periods in Tau history. So all I did was just give like really short rundowns of them because I really didn't want to be here talking about the sphere expansions for 4 hours. But yeah, so I wanted to talk about the 3 biggest, the ones that have the most information about them, which is the first, second, and third sphere expansions. And like I said earlier, there's 5, or there has been 5. But these 3 are the ones that have the most written about them that I'm aware of. So the first sphere expansion, that was when they first like set out from their world, Tau, to like expand themselves. This is from 502.m37 to 956.m38, so about a millennium. And this is when when their first colonies or septs were put together, because this is before they had any sort of like FTL technology. And technically, actually, they don't have faster than light travel yet. Or they did, and then they got taken away, and now they have like a excuse me, something in that ballpark, but it's still not faster than light. But anyway, so after the first spheres, there's a second sphere expansion, and this is after they developed their ZFR Horizon Accelerator engine, which this is what allowed them to reach near light speeds, and that's really when they started to expand more. And then this was actually when they first encountered the Imperium of Man, and then through some diplomacy and subterfuge, they were able to convince like a dozen or so worlds to join the Tau, which then led to the Damocles Gulf Crusade, and the Imperium like kicked the shit out of the Tau forces back into the Gulf. And yeah, and actually the second and third spheres kind of overlap slightly. But essentially, the Imperium kind of stopped because High Fleet Behemoth showed up, which is the Tyranids. And the Imperium's like, well, fuck, we can deal with these shitheads later. But the third sphere expansion was a big deal because effectively it put the entire Tau species as a whole on a war footing. And so this is the retaking of those worlds that were taken by the Imperium during the second sphere expansion, if I'm remembering correctly. And they had great successes until the Imperium was like, okay, well, here's a big fucking fleet for you. How about that? Or a retribution force. And so they were fucking up the Tau again until they got to this former Imperial hive world of Argellan? Argellan? Argellan, which the Imperium was like, okay, well, fine, fuck you, and they exterminated it. And this is also, that's when they assassinated one of their ethereal supreme at the time, Aunva. So, yeah, the third sphere had a lot of shit that happened to it. And that's actually, like, that's third and second spheres, like I said, kind of overlap in weird ways, because you'll talk about the second sphere, and then they'll talk about the Damocles Gulf Crusade, and then they'll talk about the third sphere, and then they'll talk about the Damocles Gulf Crusade again. So yeah, it gets kind of funky talking about it. But yeah, those are like very succinct summaries of the different sphere expansions. And then, like I said, there's 2 more after that. But anyway, so next I'm going to talk about like 2 probably the most iconic Tau characters, named characters out there. And first and foremost is one that I'm sure probably it's kind of a toss-up between these 2. But anyway, it's Commander Farsight. So I'm going to try and pronounce his whole last name. I'm going to butcher it. I'm telling you that right now, but I'm going to do it. Shaso Viorla Shova. Is it Kai? It's Kais. Monteir. Or shortened to, or it's usually it's shortened to Oshova. Fuck, I don't know. But yeah, obviously you're not going to recognize that name, so I'm just going to refer to him as Commander Farsight or Farsight. But he is one of Commander Puretide's proteges. So Puretide was just basically a famous general, like a brilliant general. And Farsight was one of his proteges, and Farsight himself was responsible for beating back the Imperium after they actually like started invading Tau space like properly. That Retribution Crusade that came and took back their worlds then started to fuck up like the actual Tau Sept worlds. One moment here. Anyway, so Farsight like got and he did extremely well fighting back against the Imperium. And this actually came after he originally got all his fame from fighting the orcs before that. But yeah, so towards the end of the Farsight's involvement in the the reclamation campaign for those worlds lost to the Imperium. Basically towards the end of it, the orcs invaded again because all of the Tau's military was focused on this thrust against the Imperium. And so the orcs, seeing this, decide, well, hey, we're going to invade again. So Farsight then turns around, takes his forces, and starts fighting the orcs again for like a decade. He just starts a war with the orcs, or he goes against the orcs for like a solid decade. And when he actually got to the point of where he had achieved victory, or at least was pushing the orcs back, he just never stopped. He just kept fighting the orcs and kept fighting the orcs until he was like way beyond the Tau Empire. Now, normally that's not too big of a deal, except during a particular mission, all of the ethereals that were accompanying Farsight were killed. Now, normally, when a commander, if all the ethereals die with a commander, he's supposed to go back to Tau and see the Ethereal High Council for orders. Instead, he just keeps killing orcs, like way beyond the bounds of Tau space, and eventually sets up his own like series of fortress worlds, which they eventually were called the Farsight Enclaves. And they were labeled like a renegade power that had betrayed the greater good. What's funny is like part of that is that he was gone for so long, so out of contact, that they thought he just died. And then eventually they started getting transmissions back from these fortress worlds. And so the ethereals like label them as renegades, like other Tau are forbidden from communicating with them. Yeah, so it's kind of a big deal. Now, the funny thing is, the other joke about the Tau is that they suck at melee combat. Well, going off of that joke, Farsight's the only Tau that's actually good at melee because he has a sword called the Dawn Blade, and it's actually an ancient Xeno artifact that he found in a dead world called Arthas Moloch. And he found it randomly because he started, like, a Daemon incursion started, a bloodthirster, led by a bloodthirster who he ended up fighting, and there's this statue or whatever that had this sword, so out of desperation he picks it up and he killed the bloodthirster with it. And ever since then he's led this. Well, he's led his expeditionary force, and he created the Farsight enclaves. What's funny about that though is that this took centuries, right? He's been gone from the Tau Empire for like 300 years, I think. Tau don't live that long. Like he was a normal ass Tau. Tau don't normally live that long. And it's because Dawnblade, whenever he kills somebody with it, he gains whatever lifespan they had left. So that's why he's lived several centuries. Like he knows that it's probably the sword that's doing it. He just doesn't know how it does it. And since he's all about honor and all that kind of shit, or at least that's talked about with the Tau and all that, they're not like really a big like honor system thing, but it's in that realm. But yeah, if he found out about it, he'd be a sad boy. So that's Farsight. Now the other one I'm going to talk about, and like I said, this is where I'm like it could go either way, is Commander Shadowsun. So after Farsight disappeared, effectively, they then turned around to Shadowsun and was like, okay, you're going to lead the Third Sphere expansion because you were basically, her and Farsight were rivals, like friendly rivals to a point. They were both proteges of Puretide. She also gained her fame fighting orcs, and her big claim was that she had historically low casualty rates, and her victories were always like super efficient. Like she was very careful with her resources, very precise, meticulous planner, like just a fantastic commander. But she was more low key. Like Farsight was very dramatic, very dynamic, in his conquests and his tactics. Whereas Shadowsun was more like, not slow, but just, I can't think of the right word. More meticulous, I suppose. Just kind of like well thought out and carefully executed instead of being big and flashy. Methodical, yeah. So Daleth, which I had mentioned earlier, that was where the Imperium got stopped by the Tau, and that was Farsight who turned it around there. Like that was the big victory. However, who gets less limelight is Shadowsun. She made it possible because her tactics like took longer to develop, but she drew out the Imperial forces and was able to like basically annihilate huge chunks of Imperial forces, which then, or tie up Imperial forces, which then led Farsight to be able to achieve the victory that he did. So she is just as what's funny is she was just as important as Farsight, just like I was said, more methodical, more in the background. Like Farsight got a lot more of the coverage for it. Like Shadowsun was still considered and is considered a hero, but Farsight had more of the spotlight, I guess. Like I said, he was more dramatic. So yeah, so Farsight left. She takes over for the third sphere expansion, and then, or no, this is before that. Excuse me. So Puretide dies. Farsight's left. So this is before she takes over for the third sphere. After Farsight's gone, the Ethereals decide they're going to take Puretide's most promising pupils, which one of them was Shadowsun, and they just freeze them. And so that's the 300-year span where Farsight's doing his thing. She's frozen, and then she wakes up and goes against the orcs, fucks up the orcs. Still shows that she's very capable and efficient and meticulous with her efforts. And then that's what led to her being appointed the Supreme Commander of the military forces for the Third Sphere expansion. So this is my mandatory White Scars plug because I fucking love the White Scars. follow me all on Twitter. I've said this a million times. I fucking love the White Scars. Anyway, so during the Third Sphere expansion, or what the Imperium called the Damocles Gulf Crusade, he's part of it. Shadow Sun was running a campaign, was doing very successful until she came into contact with Korsaro Khan of the White Scars. I think he was captain of the Third Company? Or was he the chapter master? Is he the chapter master? I thought he was like a captain. Well, anyway, he's a cool guy, and they clashed, and he told her to her face he was going to take her head, and he told everyone else Shadow Sun's head. And this was after he had like raided her command camp, killed a bunch of her subordinates, and she, going from like this cold, methodical, very, focused commander, she actually got like pissed and lost her shit and chased after Korsaro to kill him, and ended up like way overstretching her forces and getting fucked up by the Imperium. And that was like her first like major loss, is because this White Scar like basically spit in her eye. It was great. And actually it develops into like a like throughout a good chunk of the crusade, it's like this personal vendetta against each other. So Korsaro Khan and then Shadow Sun, like they know each other, and it turns into like this rivalry. Like they want to kill each other, but it's like this, I respect you as an enemy kind of deal, and it's kind of cool to see. Like there's a moment during the book Damocles where Korsaro is chasing her trying to catch her while they're on their assault bikes, and one of his like closest brothers, or like maybe it was his mentor, I think it was his mentor actually, takes a glancing hit, or takes like a glancing hit from some sort of weapon. Like doesn't kill him, but it fucks him up a ton, to the point of where they're talking about like putting him in a dreadnought. And this is kind of where it's established. It might have been mentioned in other places, but it's kind of established that White Scars, like, out of all the Loyalist chapters, like, hate the idea of being put in a dreadnought, because they're all about like speed and riding free through the plains. And if you're in a dreadnought, you can't feel the wind in your hair anymore, kind of deal. And so they like the idea of being interred in a dreadnought sarcophagus is just awful. They don't want to do it. And Shadow Sun's there, sees Korsaro, kneeling next to his dying mentor, has no weapon. He can't bring himself to kill him because it's his mentor. And he looks up to Shadow Sun, and like they pass this look between him, and Shadow Sun puts the guy out of his misery. And they like basically kind of like give each other a nod, and she leaves, and he mourns his now dead mentor. So it's a really cool dynamic with them. That's I believe it's an anthology. It's called Damocles, just Damocles. It's fantastic. Has a lot of good shit in it. Like that moment, it's really good. It also actually kind of goes into how like actually ruthless the Tau are in warfare. Like there's a moment where Shadow Sun, they're supposed to take a hive city, but it's like an enclosed hive city because of the way the planet is. And she bombs their air filtration, or their air processing systems. So then the lower population swarms up to the higher population, killing all like the upper echelons of that society, to get like rebreathers and stuff, because the poor people can't afford them, but the rich people can have like the emergency ones. And so basically she doesn't even have to invade. She just fucking blows out the air filtration systems, and the people inside take care of the rest, which is pretty fucked up if you think about it. And that was just like, that was considered like, oh yeah, that was a great move on your part, Shadow Sun. Good job. But yeah, so those are like the two like really most famous Tau characters that I'm aware of. There's probably a few others out there. I mean, I guess I could have talked about Anva, but whatever. He's an ethereal. Fuck him. Oh, really, the truth is I was concerned for time, which we're actually right on time. Except I have one more section. And I always like to include this with these big like faction overviews, and it's I've said numerous times that I do have a love for all the factions within 40k, and I really do, for different reasons. And so this is where I like to talk about, why I love this particular faction. So, I said, I love the Tau because they have mecha. The end. Just kidding. I do like mecha, but that's not, don't think I'm not saying that. Really, I think the big thing that I like about the Tau is that they're kind of like the fish out of water faction. They were locked away in their own little pocket of the galaxy, doing their thing, thinking they were, top of the pile. They had all this technology. They fought the orcs. They started their own little, pocket empire with a bunch of different species. They have the greater good. Their technology is crazy. And then they run into the Imperium of Man, which controls the rest of the fucking galaxy. And while their technology is better than the Imperium's, like it just is in a lot of ways, they if all things equal in terms of like empire sizes, like the Tau, as much as I hate to say it, would probably beat the Imperium pretty handily because their technology is so much better than what the Imperium's is. And on top of that, the Tau innovate, whereas the Imperium doesn't really. Like the Tau will rapidly develop something for a situation like the fucking the Riptide and the Storm Surge. Those are all developed during the third sphere expansion as a response to the Titans. The Imperium doesn't do that, and their plasma technology, the Tau's plasma technology is better. Doesn't overheat and explode. They have their rail guns, which the Imperium has no equivalent to, except, well, I guess Nova cannons are similar-ish, but certainly nothing man-portable. And yeah, so. But really, with how the things are in the 40k universe, like the Tau Empire is basically a horsefly chewing on the ass of the Imperium. Like, they're painful, but it's not going to kill them. Now, I don't know if that's actually true with horseflies. The point, like, yeah, I don't know shit about horseflies. I just know they're assholes. They bite you and it hurts. But the point is that they can do some damage, but they can't win, at least not in a straight-up fight. That's the long and short of it. Lucky for them, the Imperium has, like, half a dozen other enemies it's fighting at the same time, including sometimes itself. So it can't concentrate its full might on the Tau, which is why they still exist. And I kind of like the stuff with the ethereals is kind of just like, it's ambiguous. So it's like it's mind control or it's not, but really it probably is a little bit of mind control rather than them just being the goody goodies in a universe of holy shit that's horrifying. Plus, it makes sense that they would steadily get worse as time goes on because of their exposure to these horrifying things. I think that's why people who cry about that a lot get upset, because then it justifies the Imperium's line of thinking. Then you either become a monster, protect yourself, or you die. I guess in a way, if it was done better, you could make that more apparent as time goes on with their faction as a whole. They start off as this idealistic race that then turns into a coalition of races, and then steadily gets darker the more they are exposed, especially after fighting chaos a few times. So they start. I like the idea of if they fleshed it out a little bit more, where they start out more pure-ish, like the ethereals are. The ethereals are doing whatever the ethereals are doing, but in general, they're very idealistic. They're very kind of pure. They're the greater good, blah blah blah. And then as they expand their borders, they expand their horizons. They start getting exposed little by little to the horrors of the galaxy, and each time they do, they get a little more authoritarian, or they get a little more ruthless or whatever to combat this new threat. And then especially when they start fighting fucking chaos, like, that's when it can get real fucking twisted, right? Is when they're fighting chaos. So, I always thought that could be a really neat spin if they pulled that off. Yeah, just kind of like this slow, I don't want to say corruption, although I suppose that could be it. It's more of like a slow, like, I don't know. I guess corruption would be the right word. But yeah. Anyway. Yeah. That is all I got today, folks. Fucking 14 pages of notes and 8,000 words later, plus all the other crap that yeah. The tower somewhat convinced they killed Slaanesh. Really? I didn't know that. That does surprise me. Well, I mean, of course they would kind of think that they had because they don't know jack shit about the warp. Really? So, that doesn't surprise me, actually. But, yeah. Anyway. That was my Tau lore dump. I appreciate y'all for coming on out and seeing me. Fighting a Slaanesh champion who claimed to be Slaanesh. Ah. Yeah, I'm Slaanesh champion, just fucking with them because they could. I could see that. But anyway, it is after 11 for me. I unfortunately have work in the morning, so I do need to go to bed. As far as yeah, you're welcome, Cat, and it'll be up on our YouTube channel too. So if there's any bits that you missed, you can watch the whole thing there. And I also believe it is ad-free because it doesn't record the ads from Twitch. It just pipes the feed directly from Lightstream. So if you missed any bits because of ads, you can watch it on YouTube and those will not be there. Yeah. So as far as our schedule this week, Wednesday, everybody's getting together for Dark Tide. I believe Z is doing something on Thursday. I forgot what plane he's having. Oh, very nice, Cat. Thank you. Hopefully you don't hate my voice as much as I do. Clearly not if you're watching it again. So thank you for that. And then let's see. Friday I am off this week. Greedfall. That's right. That's. I knew he was playing an RPG. I could not think of the name. Z's playing Greedfall on Thursday. Friday, Llama. Oh well, thank you. I'm very self-conscious of it. I'm not even gonna lie. But Llama, I believe, will be playing something on Friday. I have no idea. This is kind of a new thing. We're trying to have something every Friday. So Pig and I are still doing his non-on-call Fridays together, in which actually I believe Llama will be joining us on those as well. So he's going to be an every Friday guy regardless, I believe is the plan. And then after that, I don't know if Pig's doing Stationeers on Saturday, but this next Monday, I'm going to be doing another lore rant on the Necrons, because that's what you guys voted on. And they are actually up there as one of my more favorite factions, so we'll see how that goes. Anyway, thank you all for stopping by.